Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Sometimes I wonder if happiness is like a unicorn. Everyone's chasing it, but does anyone really know what it is?
Right.
Luckily, we've got the 2024 World Happiness Report as our trusty map today.
Okay.
We're diving deep into what makes people tick, what makes societies flourish, and maybe even uncover a few happiness hacks along the way. I'm ready to unlock some secrets.
I'm ready. And I think you're right to compare it to a unicorn. There are so many myths and misconceptions about happiness, and this report helps us, sift through the fantasy and get to the fascinating reality.
Exactly. And one thing that jumps out right away is the global happiness ranking. Finland's at the top again, 3 years running.
Yeah.
You'd think they'd be sick of winning by now.
Right.
But then you look at the other end of the spectrum with Afghanistan holding the last spot, and it really hits you that happiness isn't some universal given. It's a complex puzzle with different pieces in different places.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this report so much more than just a ranking. It digs into the WHY. Why does Finland consistently top the charts?
Well, it's not just about saunas and heavy metal, although those probably help.
Right.
Their social safety nets are incredibly strong. There's a deep sense of community trust, and they prioritize work-life balance. It paints a picture of a society that's intentionally structured to support well-being.
So it's not about chasing some fleeting feeling of bliss. It's about creating the conditions for people to actually thrive.
Precisely. And the report breaks down these conditions into 6 key factors: GDP per capita, social support, healthy life expectancy, freedom to make life choices, generosity, and freedom from corruption. They're like the ingredients in a happiness recipe, and different countries combine them in different ways.
Okay, let's unpack these ingredients. GDP, sure, I get it. More money, more happy, right? But it's not quite that simple, is it? It's definitely more nuanced than that. Take a look at Latin America. They face high levels of corruption, which you'd think would tank their happiness scores. But they also have incredibly strong social support networks, families, friends, communities rallying together. And that social support seems to act as a buffer, helping people navigate those challenges and maintain a sense of well-being.
So even in the face of hardship, having people you can rely on can make all the difference. It reminds me of that saying, joy shared is joy doubled, sorrow shared is sorrow halved.
Exactly. And on the other end of the spectrum, think about those countries that rank high in both freedom and generosity.
Okay.
There seems to be a powerful link there. When people feel empowered to make their own choices, they're also more likely to extend that generosity to others. It creates a virtuous cycle where individual freedom fuels a culture of giving back.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. The report dives into generational trends. And millennials and Gen Z, that's us, by the way, well, we're not exactly painting a rosy picture of happiness. Our life satisfaction levels are lower compared to older generations.
That's right. And there's a lot of speculation about why that might be. Are we facing more pressure, more uncertainty? Is it the economic climate, the state of the world, or something else entirely?
So are we just a bunch of grumpy, entitled millennials?
Wow.
Not quite, right? Because here's the twist. We're also the most likely generation to help others in need. During COVID, there was a surge in donations, volunteering, people stepping up to help strangers, and a lot of that was driven by millennials and Gen Z.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? On one hand, we report lower levels of personal happiness, but on the other, we're incredibly compassionate and driven to make a positive impact. It challenges the traditional definition of happiness and makes you wonder if our values are shifting, if we're defining a fulfilling life in a different way.
So maybe it's not just about how happy WE feel, but about how we contribute to the happiness of others. That's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
It is, and it raises all sorts of questions. Are we seeking fulfillment through collective action? Are we trying to fix a world we feel disillusioned with? It definitely flips the script on the me millennial stereotype.
Right. And it reminds us that happiness isn't a one-size-fits-all concept. It evolves across generations, shaped by our experiences, our values, and the world around us.
That's a key takeaway. And speaking of how happiness evolves, let's talk about the age-old question. Does happiness really decline as we get older, or is there more to the story?
Well, there's this idea of the age U-shape, that we're happiest when we're young and old, with a dip in middle age. But this report throws a wrench in that whole concept, suggesting it might not be as universal as we thought.
Hold on. Are you telling me midlife crises aren't a real thing? I was kind of looking forward to buying that red convertible.
Don't cancel that order just yet. There's definitely something going on in middle age, but it seems to play out differently in different cultures. In some regions, like South Asia, happiness actually climbs steadily as people age. U-shape be darned.
So what, are they just better at handling stress? Do they have some secret sauce we're missing? It's a fascinating question. The report suggests it might have to do with societal structures, cultural values around aging, even how different societies define happiness. It's a good reminder that we can't just assume our Western experience is the norm.
Okay, mystery solved. No midlife crisis, just a midlife cultural recalibration. I can work with that. But speaking of aging, the report takes a deep dive into the well-being of older adults, and there are some seriously mind-blowing findings in there.
Chapter 4 is where things get really interesting. One of the most significant findings is that high levels of well-being throughout life can actually protect against dementia. It's like happiness is brain food. The more you nourish your well-being, the better your brain functions in later years.
Wait, so being happy can help prevent dementia? I need to tell my grandma to stop watching the news and start binge-watching cat videos.
There's definitely more research to be done, but it's a tantalizing possibility. And it ties back to those 6 factors we talked about earlier: GDP, social support, freedom, the whole shebang. What if focusing on those things throughout our lives leads to a happier and healthier old age?
Yeah.
It's like investing in your future well-being.
Talk about a long-term payoff. And speaking of long-term happiness, Chapter 5 zooms in on India, which is fascinating because they seem to be flipping the script on that whole U-shape thing.
Exactly. The report found that, contrary to what you might expect, given the socioeconomic challenges, older age is linked to higher life satisfaction in India. It goes against a lot of our assumptions about aging and happiness.
So what's their secret? Yoga, meditation, a nationwide Bollywood sing-along?
Well, the report highlights one key factor: satisfaction with living arrangements. It seems that having a sense of stability and comfort in their home environment plays a huge role in their well-being.
It makes you think about the importance of feeling rooted, especially as you get older. It's not just about material comfort, but also about a sense of belonging and connection to a place.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about feeling safe and secure in your surroundings, which is a basic human need that becomes even more important as we age.
So we've got Finland with their social safety nets, Latin America with their strong social connections, and India with their emphasis on stable living arrangements. It's like they've each cracked a different piece of the happiness code.
Exactly, and that's what makes this research so valuable. It shows us that there are multiple pathways to well-being, each shaped by cultural values, societal structures, and individual choices.
Okay, so we've talked about how happiness changes with age, but what about those generational trends we were discussing earlier? Remember how millennials and Gen Z are scoring lower on life satisfaction? I'm starting to feel personally attacked by this report.
Well, before you take it too personally, let's dive a little deeper into those generational differences, especially when it comes to social connections. This report has a whole section on how different generations experience loneliness, social support, and the impact of those things on well-being.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me some good news. Tell me we're not all doomed to be lonely and miserable.
Well, the good news is that, globally, feelings of social support are far more prevalent than feelings of loneliness. We're social creatures by nature, and having strong connections is essential to our happiness. But here's where it gets interesting. Different generations experience those connections in very different ways.
Okay, lay it on me. How do we stack up against the olds?
Based on new global social connection data, the report found that older generations, the boomers and their predecessors, tend to report the highest levels of perceived social support. Makes sense, they've had more time to build those networks, right?
Makes sense. Years of holiday gatherings, neighborhood barbecues, book clubs, it all adds up. So where do we millennials fall short?
Well, millennials and Gen Z tend to report lower levels of perceived social support. Now, there are a few theories about why this might be. Some researchers point to the pressures of our hyper-connected world. The constant comparison, the FOMO, the feeling that everyone else has it figured out except you.
It's like social media is this highlight reel of everyone else's perfect lives, making our own feel inadequate by comparison.
Exactly. And then there's the rise of digital communication. We're more connected than ever, but are those connections as deep and meaningful as face-to-face interactions? The report raises some important questions about the quality versus quantity of our relationships.
It's like that saying, alone together. We're surrounded by people online, but still feeling isolated and disconnected.
Precisely. And when we look at loneliness, the picture gets even more interesting. The report found that loneliness actually peaks in early adulthood, around age 20, and then steadily declines with age. So it's not necessarily the stereotypical image of lonely seniors.
So those grannies gossiping on park benches are actually onto something. Maybe they've cracked the code to social fulfillment.
Seems they might have a thing or two to teach us. The report highlights that the oldest members of the population, those over 60, consistently report the lowest levels of loneliness across various regions.
Maybe it's because they've had more practice navigating those social landscapes. They've learned to prioritize meaningful connections and let go of the superficial stuff.
That's great insight. And it reinforces the importance of fostering those connections throughout our lives, not just assuming they'll magically appear when we reach a certain age.
Right. It's about being proactive, reaching out, building those relationships that bring us joy and support no matter what stage of life we're in. But speaking of being proactive, the report doesn't just leave us hanging with these findings. It actually suggests some concrete ways to boost happiness, particularly when it comes to social interaction.
And these aren't just vague suggestions. They're based on hard data. The report found that engaging in social interactions contributes to happiness in multiple ways. First, it leads to increases in social support. Makes sense, right? The more you interact with people you care about, the stronger those bonds become, the more supported you feel.
It's like a positive feedback loop. The more you connect, the more connected you feel, the happier you are. But there's more, right? It's not just about building support, but also combating loneliness.
You got it. Social interaction also helps reduce loneliness. When you're actively engaging with others, you're less likely to feel isolated or disconnected. It's a two-pronged approach to happiness, strengthening those positive connections and warding off those feelings of isolation.
Okay, so we need to get out there and mingle. But where do we start? The report doesn't leave us hanging, does it?
Not at all. It actually provides some specific examples of how these social dynamics play out in different age groups. For instance, it highlights the case of young adults in the North America, Australia, and New Zealand region. Let's call them the NANZ crew for short.
Wow.
They tend to experience lower levels of happiness, and the report suggests that if they could boost their social support and reduce their loneliness to match that of older adults in the same region, their happiness levels would likely soar.
So it's like a happiness prescription. Take 2 doses of social support, 1 dose of loneliness reduction, and call me in the morning. But seriously, it's fascinating to see how these social connection gaps can directly impact well-being, especially for younger generations.
It's a powerful reminder that happiness isn't just about individual circumstances or personality traits. It's also deeply intertwined with the social fabric of our lives, the strength of our connections, and the quality of our interactions.
Okay, we've talked a lot about how social connections and generational trends impact happiness, but let's circle back to that age U-shape for a minute. I'm still not quite convinced that midlife crises are a myth. Is there anything in the report that supports my need for a red convertible?
Well, the report dives deep into analyzing the age-related dynamics of happiness, using the largest global data set yet to examine this U-shaped phenomenon. And while it challenges the idea of a universal U-shape, it does acknowledge that the trend is more pronounced in some regions than others.
So are you saying some cultures are just better at aging gracefully than others? What's their secret?
It's not about being better, but rather about different cultural values and societal structures impacting how happiness evolves throughout life. For example, the U-shape is more commonly observed in Western Europe and Latin America, while it's less evident in regions like South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa.
So maybe those cultures that emphasize community, extended family, and respect for elders have a built-in buffer against midlife malaise. It's like they've woven those happiness-boosting factors in the very fabric of their societies.
That's a really insightful observation. It seems like those cultures that prioritize intergenerational connections and value the wisdom of older adults might be onto something.
Okay, but the report goes beyond just looking at the overall U-shape. It also breaks down how specific factors might influence happiness at different stages of life. Give me the nitty-gritty. What are the things that make us happy or unhappy as we age?
Well, one of the big ones is health. Not a huge surprise there. As we get older, our bodies tend to cooperate less, and those aches and pains can definitely take a toll on our well-being. The report found that the impact of health issues on happiness is particularly pronounced in older adults.
Okay, that makes sense. But it's not like older adults are just sitting around feeling miserable, right? There's got to be something else going on, some counterbalancing force that keeps them from spiraling into despair.
You're right. Despite the increased impact of health issues, the report still found that happiness levels tend to be higher in older adults compared to those in midlife. So what's going on here? How are they managing to stay afloat in the face of creaky joints and doctor's appointments?
Spill the beans. What's the secret to their resilience?
The report suggests there are other factors that might compensate for those age-related health challenges. One is a greater sense of freedom to make life choices.
Ah, the golden years. Retirement, grandkids, finally having time to pursue those hobbies that got pushed aside for work and family.
Exactly. That sense of autonomy and control over one's life can be a powerful antidote to the challenges of aging. And it's not just about freedom. Social relationships also play a huge role in buffering against the negative impacts of health issues.
Those strong social connections coming to the rescue once again. It's like having a built-in support system to help you navigate those tough times.
Precisely. And the report introduces a fascinating concept that might help explain why older adults often maintain high levels of happiness despite those health challenges. The age-related positivity effect.
Okay, that sounds intriguing. Tell me more about this positivity effect.
Well, research has shown that as people age, they tend to shift their focus towards more positive information and memories.
So it's like their brains are filtering out the negative stuff and highlighting the good. Sign me up for that brain upgrade.
It's almost like our brains become naturally wired to prioritize the positive aspects of life as we get older. And this positivity effect isn't just limited to emotions. It also extends to how we evaluate our lives as a whole. The report suggests this might explain why older adults, even when facing health issues, still report higher levels of life satisfaction.
So it's a combination of focusing on the good and having those years of experience to draw upon. They've weathered the storms, learned from their mistakes, and come out the other side with a deeper appreciation for the simple things in life.
Beautifully said. And it reminds us that aging isn't just about decline and loss. It's also about growth, wisdom, and a shift in perspective that can bring profound joy and contentment.
Okay, so the U-shape isn't a hard and fast rule, but rather a fluid trend influenced by a whole host of factors. But there's one thing I'm still a little fuzzy on. How do we separate age-related changes in happiness from generational differences? Isn't it possible that millennials are just starting at a lower happiness baseline?
That's a great question. And the report acknowledges the importance of distinguishing between those two things. When we're looking at age-related trends, we need to remember that different generations might have different starting points.
So it's not just about how our happiness changes as we age, but also about the generation we belong to. It's like each generation is running a different happiness marathon, each with its own terrain and obstacles.
Exactly. Growing up in different historical periods, with different cultural norms and social expectations, can shape our outlook on life and our overall levels of happiness.
Makes you wonder how those generational experiences, like economic recessions or technological advancements, might imprint themselves on our happiness trajectories. It's like each generation carries its own collective baggage into the happiness game.
It's a fascinating area of study, and the report digs into this by analyzing how happiness patterns have changed over time for different generational cohorts.
Okay, so what's the verdict? Are we millennials doomed to be the unhappiest generation in history? Give it to me straight.
Well, the report found that while happiness levels tend to rise with age for older generations, the pattern is less consistent for younger generations. In fact, for millennials and Gen Z, happiness actually appears to decline slightly with age.
Okay, that's not what I wanted to hear, but I guess it's not all that surprising. We're facing some pretty unprecedented challenges. Economic uncertainty, climate change, social division. It's enough to make anyone feel a little gloomy.
It's true. And the report speculates that these unique challenges, along with the pressures of a hyper-connected world, might be contributing to this downward trend in happiness for younger generations.
So it's not just that we're a bunch of whiny millennials. There are real systemic forces at play here that are impacting our well-being. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? The report also highlights some positive trends, especially when it comes to things like benevolence and social engagement. Tell me something hopeful.
One of the most encouraging findings is that despite those challenges, millennials and Gen Z are actually leading the way in terms of generosity and helping behaviors.
Wait, seriously? So we're not just glued to our phones, posting selfies and complaining about avocado toast prices. We're actually out there making a difference.
Absolutely. The report found that in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a global surge in benevolent behaviors, donating, volunteering, helping strangers, and those increases were most pronounced among millennials and Gen Z.
So even in the midst of a global crisis, we found ways to support each other and make the world a better place. It's like a beacon of hope in a sometimes dark world.
Exactly. It reminds us that each generation has the power to shape a more compassionate and just society, and it challenges those tired stereotypes about millennials being self-centered and entitled.
Okay, so we might be facing some unique challenges, but we're also stepping up to the plate in terms of compassion and social responsibility. That's something to be proud of. But let's be real, happiness isn't just about individual actions. It's also about the societies we live in, the systems that are in place, the way resources are distributed.
You're absolutely right. And the report dives into that aspect by examining the concept of equality and how it relates to happiness.
Okay, let's talk about fairness. Because what good is a happy society if those happy feelings aren't distributed evenly?
Exactly. And the report's findings are pretty sobering. It reveals that global happiness inequality has actually increased by over 20% in the past 12 years.
Wow, that's a huge jump. And I'm guessing this inequality isn't spread out evenly across the globe.
You guessed right. The report found that happiness inequality has increased most dramatically in certain regions, including sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and the Middle East and North Africa.
Regions already facing immense challenges: poverty, conflict, political instability. It makes you wonder how those existing inequalities might be exacerbating this growing gap in happiness.
It's a complex interplay of factors. And it's not just about geographic disparities. It also plays out across generations. The report highlights that happiness inequality has increased most significantly among older adults in certain regions, such as Latin America, Southeast Asia, and the Commonwealth of Independent States.
So it's not just about bridging the gap between rich and poor countries. It's also about addressing those disparities within societies, ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to experience well-being, regardless of their age or circumstances.
Precisely. And this brings us back to the core message of the report. Happiness isn't just a personal pursuit. It's a collective responsibility.
So it's not enough to focus on our own individual happiness. We also need to advocate for policies and systems that promote well-being for everyone across all generations and socioeconomic backgrounds.
Exactly. We need to be mindful of those systemic factors that can either enhance or hinder happiness and work towards creating a world where everyone has the chance to thrive.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the U-shape, social connections, generational differences, and the importance of equality. But before we wrap up, there's one more thing I'm curious about. The report talks a lot about benevolence and how it contributes to happiness, but it also acknowledges that there are different types of benevolence and that those differences might matter.
You're right. The report distinguishes between two types of benevolence: helping strangers and helping those we know personally. And it seems that these different types of helping behaviors might have distinct impacts on our well-being.
Okay, so explain it to me like I'm 5. What's the difference between helping a stranger and helping a friend? Don't they both count as good deeds?
They do. But the report suggests that helping strangers might actually lead to greater increases in happiness compared to helping those we know.
Really? Why would that be? You'd think helping someone you have a personal connection with would feel more rewarding.
It's counterintuitive, right? But there are a few possible explanations. One is that helping strangers might challenge us more, pushing us outside of our comfort zones and expanding our sense of compassion. It can also feel more impactful, like we're making a difference in the world beyond our immediate circle.
So it's like those random acts of kindness, holding the door for someone, paying for the person behind you in line. Those little gestures can actually have a ripple effect, boosting our own happiness and creating a more positive social environment.
Exactly. And it reminds us that even small acts of kindness can have a profound impact on our own well-being and the well-being of those around us.
This is blowing my mind. It's like a whole new perspective on happiness. It's not just about chasing our own individual bliss. It's about contributing to a collective sense of well-being, both within our personal circles and in the wider world.
Beautifully put. And that brings us back to the core message of the World Happiness Report. Happiness isn't just a feeling. It's a way of being, a way of relating to ourselves, to each other, and to the world around us.
So it's not about achieving some perfect state of euphoria. It's about cultivating those inner and outer conditions that allow us to flourish, both individually and collectively. It's like we've been handed this treasure map to happiness, but it's not a straight line. It's a choose your own adventure with all these different paths and possibilities. It's a bit overwhelming, but also kind of exciting, wouldn't you say?
I completely agree. And I think that's what makes happiness research so compelling. It's not about finding a one-size-fits-all solution. It's about empowering people with the knowledge and tools to create their own unique paths to well-being.
So how do we take on this amazing research and actually put it into practice? Do we all need to move to Finland and start wearing those funny hats?
Well, a Finnish sauna getaway never hurts. But the good news is that the report goes beyond just identifying the factors that contribute to happiness. It also offers some concrete suggestions for how we can translate those findings into action, both individually and on a societal level.
Okay, give me the actionable insights. What can we as individuals do to boost our own happiness? And what about those big picture changes? What can governments and organizations do to create a more happiness-friendly world?
Let's start with those individual actions. Remember those 6 key factors we talked about earlier? Well, those can serve as guideposts for our daily choices. Cultivating strong social connections, prioritizing our physical and mental health, finding work that gives us a sense of purpose, contributing to our communities, advocating for fairness and justice. These are all things we can actively do to shape our own well-being.
It's like we've been given this recipe for happiness, and now it's up to us to gather the ingredients and start cooking.
Exactly. And don't forget, happiness isn't a destination, it's a journey. It's about embracing the ups and downs, learning from our experiences, and continuously striving to create a life that feels fulfilling and meaningful.
Easier said than done some days, right? But it's a good reminder that we're all works in progress. Now, what about those big picture changes? What can be done on a societal level to promote well-being?
Well, one of the most promising developments is that some countries are starting to incorporate well-being indicators into their national statistics. They're using happiness data to track progress, inform policy decisions, and create a more holistic measure of societal success.
That's incredible. It's like they're saying, hey, GDP growth is great, but we also care about how our citizens are feeling, and we're going to use this data to create policies that promote their well-being. It's a huge shift in perspective.
It is. And in addition to those top-down approaches, there are also countless grassroots initiatives popping up all over the globe, focused on fostering happiness and well-being within communities. Things like community gardens, mindfulness programs, intergenerational mentorship programs, these are all examples of how people are taking matters into their own hands and creating positive change from the ground up.
So it's a multi-pronged approach. Governments, organizations, and individuals all working together to create a world where happiness is a priority, not an afterthought.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping a happier and more fulfilling world.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this fascinating world of happiness research, I want to leave you, dear listener, with this thought. If we know that happiness is influenced by so many factors, our genes, our choices, our relationships, the societies we live in, what if we started to intentionally design our lives, our communities, our world with well-being in mind? What kind of future could we create?
It's a powerful question, and I think it's one that each of us needs to grapple with. The research is clear. Happiness is not some random lottery. It's something we can cultivate, nurture, and even amplify through our actions, our choices, and the way we structure our world.
So let's get out there and start building that happier world, one kind act, one mindful moment, one policy change at a time.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Until next time, may your journey be filled with joy, connection, and a deep sense of well-being.